Hello, and welcome back to the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. My name is GuruNischan, and as always, I like to read the intentions for why I started this podcast before we begin. Number one, to break the veil of silence that has long permeated and continues to strangle the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community in the name of neutrality. Number two, to validate and help clarify the complex feelings of those who have joined this lifestyle, who were born and raised into it, and or who have practiced or taught Kundalini Yoga. Number three, to encourage active listening to uncomfortable conversations from our community as a revolutionary act of self and collective healing. Number four, to let survivors know that we see them, we believe them, we love them, and we will fight for their truth to be addressed. Number five, to let teachers who are denying, gaslighting, or spiritually bypassing know that what they are doing is willfully ignorant and re-traumatizing victims. Number six, to illuminate the inherent racism, homophobia, cultural appropriation, and exploitation that perpetuates the teachings, 3HO lifestyle, and the overall community ethos. Number seven, to stop the perpetuation of gaslighting and victim shaming by naming it for what it is. Number eight, to dismantle internalized shame, guilt, toxic positivity, and light-washing mentality. Number nine, to honor all the parts of ourselves that have been forgotten or silenced. Number 10, to honor each and every body that has come through this community, both named and unnamed. And number 11, to encourage people to do their own research, to process your own emotions, to get somatic therapy and other forms of therapy as needed, to draw your own conclusions and to be critical thinkers rather than to just blindly follow anyone. Please remember that your story matters. Please share it when you're ready. And please remember that we're here to listen and to support you. On today's episode, we have a special treat. And before I get going and introduce what we're about to do, I just want to say thank you for listening. Thank you for the feedback on our last episode. And thank you for following me on my new podcast, Uncomfortable Conversations on Predators in Business, Community, and Culture. I'm on Substack, and you have a chance to comment on each episode and kind of interact with me. And that's the idea here, is to really create community, because listening is a revolutionary act in our healing. And if we continue to engage and participate in the silence of the violence that's occurring around us because we don't know how to process it, because we don't know what to do with it, we actually become a part of that violence through our silence. So do the best you can to tune in and share these episodes, because it's only as we speak to and discern and pay attention to the predatory patterns that are happening all around us that we can begin to feel and notice them within ourselves. And on that note, we have a special episode bringing back Darci Larocque from the last episode. I'm not going to read a bio, because you can go back and you can hear her story and her setup of her story. But she basically got started in 3HO at age 5 in 1971-ish, somewhere around that. 1976?
Yeah, I was born in 71.
You were 5, right?
Yes.
You were born in
Yes.
71, 1976. You're 5 years old, and you get pulled into 3HO, and life begins.
Yep.
We're bringing her back today because the last episode was really creating the container and the structure and the outline of the details of her life, but also left out a lot of the vulnerable leftovers, what we like to call the impact of our lives. And Darci and I had a conversation to follow up on our last episode, and she has a lot more to say. And I wanted to make that space because you are an OG of our generation, in my opinion. There's this infamous language we bring to 3HO called the second gen or the first gen. And it leaves a bunch of people out because there's some kids that weren't born in, but they were brought in, and then there were other circumstances. But bottom line is, if you were a child and you are brought into this community underage in any capacity, you are a part of this generation of second gen. But within that, there are many layers and levels of the kids and the age groups. And because 3HO was so age segregated, there's a very distinct kind of posse amongst what generation you're in and what experiences you had or didn't, and a bit of a caste system according to age. And Darci really represents that original age group of children, what we like to call the laboratory children, that kind of initial group of kids that were the labs. And I'm going to let you take it from here, Darci. Thank you for coming back.
No, thank you. You know, as I thought about last week, and this phrase kept coming to my head this week, a phrase that I have to be honest, I don't think I've said, thought about, or entertained for 30 years. And I kept hearing keep up. And I kept in my own head going, keep up equals shut up, keep up equals shut up. And I have not thought about that for decades. And last week, as I told this anthropology, this history, and it's so convoluted. I mean, you know, my son's history from 5 to 13 is based on his grammar school experiences and a test he took in 4th grade and a Boy Scout trip. And mine is about the fact that I lived in multiple ashrams, which were really compounds, right? You were completely isolated. And it's necessary to have the history to understand the impact. And I think it's also necessary, especially with the OG group, the guinea pigs. And we were the guinea pigs. Again, I said this last week, how far could he push us? How much could he get away with? And again, at the time, it didn't feel like that. It felt like a revolution. But in hindsight, it was a chess game, and we were the pawns. And in telling that last week, I did what I always do. It was factual. It was timeline. It was crazy, but I sanitize. I neutralize. I am systemic in what I say and how I say it so that I mitigate questions. It's how I talk when I talk to my friends. Oh yeah, I'm casual. I was raised in a cult. Oh yeah, I was in an ashram. Well, that sounds cool, right? That again sounds like the adventure I ascribed to believe I was in. But at the end of the day, we were shuffled around, and that was part of the control. And we were not with our parents, and that was part of the control. And the litany of things that were part of the control to both our parents and to us is vast. And in telling the history, some of it can come out anecdotal, and that's not what it is. So I think that some of us have gone through a process recently where we wrote the history and then we wrote the impact. So as long as last week was, can you imagine telling your own child's history for 10 years of your life, and it's that long and it's that crazy, because that's not what you would have done to your own children. Not intentionally anyway. I know I would not have. I would never have intentionally had my child suffer. But that is what happened. We suffered.
Yeah, and I want to pause and just kind of name some of the things that you just, or kind of highlight the things you just named. You talked about how you speak in factual, you neutralize the systemic nature of it, and how it's a form of openness, but it doesn't include vulnerability, right? So it's very open to like, yeah, I did this and this. And again, it speaks to kind of the adventure and awesomeness or uniqueness or exceptionalism, but not actually the fragmentation that each of those experiences caused.
100%. 100%. So as you and I have spoken this week, I really, again, in the spirit of keep up equals shut up, thought to myself, And it hit me. I've never equated it.
Me neither.
I've never equated years and years of keep up, G, and you hold your pose and you stay quiet and you discipline. And it means shut up, don't complain, don't cry, don't react.
Don't
react. How did we get here when you're holding a perfect yoga pose and then you hear the history and you're a new yoga student, or you're a parent who's hearing me talk about this and you're like, it wasn't so bad. My father did that right up until the day he died. He couldn't fathom that there was any cause of concern. I mean, Sri Singh Sab, Yogi Bhajan, however you want to call him, he knows better. A TSA agent knows better. And Miranda, and I thought about that this week too, that if I were to go to LAX and just pick some random guy who happens to be charismatic and handsome and say, hey, my daughter's having a medical issue. Can I get your opinion? And he does. And suddenly that's my medical diagnosis. Hey, random guy, my daughter needs to be married. Random guy assigns me to some other dude in line, because that's what happened. At the end of the day, he was just a man.
Just a random dude.
Just a random dude at TSA in India. And he dictated every facet of our lives.
Well said.
So what we discussed is I'm going to actually, to keep myself on track, I'm going to read some portions of something I've written lately. And I'm going to read it almost verbatim. Much like last week, I'm going to take out a couple things that are names because I am not comfortable outing anybody who has not gone through their own process. And our OG group is small in Espanola, and it would mean speaking on behalf of somebody else, which is not something I would be willing to do.
Absolutely. Fair enough.
So if I pause or hesitate, it's because I'm jumping a sentence or two. So the nature of my harms in no particular order. So this is, again, a young girl from the age of 5 to 13. And of several of those years in the New Mexico ashram, without my parents, assigned to guardians, basically in a 3HO foster system.
That's right. And if you want the details, go back and listen to that first episode so you can really hear the atmosphere and how she ended up in these atmospheres. And now we get kind of the inside version of Darci going through all these experiences.
So the nature of my harms in no particular order. I was malnourished. I was sleep deprived. I was bullied. I became a bully. I was ostracized. I was shot at with a gun at the Dorchester ashram. I was in the kitchen. We dressed daily in assigned clothes with only 3 colors allowed: white, blue, or gold. We were publicly shouted at if we were in public like freaks, called Q-tip, turpentine. We did everything we could to stand out, dressed head to toe in white turbans, no matter the situation. To this day, I am uncomfortable if my hair is down, and I settle only when I'm wearing all white. In the areas of towns that we lived in, Dorchester and Espanola, that placed a target on our back. I speak to that as they were tougher communities within the areas. We stood out in the worst way possible. To this day, I do everything I can to not get noticed. I won't even open a gift in front of everyone for fear of attention. In all the ashrams and camps, we were woken every day at 3 a.m. We were forced to take a cold shower with ashram members watching us to ensure we didn't warm it up. We then did hours of yoga, followed by meditation and prayer. This was done without food or water prior to the daily requirements. In Espanola, I was hit, I was slapped by my guardians. We were placed in a sexually charged peer environment as children where we were unsupervised. I had physical strain that lasts to this day from the intense physical expectations in our quote unquote exercise. I was angry, I was hungry. I lost all boundaries for normalcy, being engaged by Yogi Bhajan himself. I lost relationships with my real family. I lost formal and proper education. I have food issues, as we would go a month on the same exact diet in the camps, which was oranges, bananas, mung beans. I will starve myself and have poor nutrition, as there was no foundation. I was taught that we must be thin, fat is bad. As a teenager, I suffered from anorexia to stay thin for my body dysmorphia. I lack compassion, as I think with what we went through, people are weak who haven't experienced such strain. I have physical scars from untreated medical issues on my legs and arms. I have severe dental issues due to no proper care. I have PTSD. I don't sleep well. Even as the youngest child, one of the youngest children in the Espanola ashram, I was forced to do exactly what the older kids did every day in quote unquote school. That included the long miles runs in the desert. Every other day, the 1 mile sprint, hundreds of sit-ups, hundreds of squat thrusts. And being able to forced to keep the pace of a teenager at my age caused permanent damage to my back if I didn't quote unquote keep up. The entire group would be punished if one of us couldn't, and we had to do it again. This pressure created a lifelong weight of feeling it is 100% on me to be responsible. I had severe anger management issues that carried into my arrest for assault. I didn't know how to parent. I didn't learn how to love, both to give or to get. I am emotionally cold. I have a survival instinct to take care of myself at all costs to those around me. And I accept with complete resignation that any way a man treats me should be tolerated and accepted without protest. I don't push myself to new levels as I'm insecure about a paycheck, and I have this dire need to stay stable. I work from fear, not courage. I work all the time. I don't stop. I'm afraid to. I have spent literal decades in therapy to learn to love, to parent, to be married, to control my anger, and to learn to love myself. I believe that I deserve whatever happens to me. As a woman, I created the situations that landed me here. I feel guilt about eating meat as if I would be reincarnated as a bug. We were told as kids that even eating animal-shaped carob cookies could land us reincarnated as bugs. I believed the world would end and we would live atop the mountain in New Mexico. I believed that when giving up my 3HO name, I became a whore, and my father reminded me so until his death. I wear mostly conservative clothes that cover my body, as I'm ashamed to be sensual. And at the end of all of this, I was raised to believe that I need to be strong, and to admit or say anything in this list is a complete, total failing of my teaching. And I believe that no matter what, and at all costs, I keep up. If you look at me, if you talk to me, you get none of this, nor do you experience my trauma, because I'm a master of being fine.
Wow. I don't even know where to enter. I made a ton of notes.
I saw, yeah.
And I'm taking notes on all of the areas that feel so resonant. But before I go into all that, I'm wondering if you can speak to a couple of them. One
Sure.
of them is the sexually charged peer environment. I know you spoke to sexual abuse, and something in the line you mentioned was not even recognizing it as abuse.
Yeah, I think for me, and again, this is where I'm going to be very, very careful because it's my own experience.
And it involves others that might not have processed things too.
Correct.
So understand that one of the things, and before you go on, Darci, I want listeners to really hear one of the challenges around speaking to our 3HO experience is, and really any cult or high demand group, is that the webs of our experiences are webbed in relational experiences. And so one of the ways that predatory patterns thrive is through our silence. And one of the reasons we stay silent isn't just for our own safety, but it's out of safety for others. And that's a real thing, because so much of our sense of self and belonging was about service to others. So it's almost like we don't belong, we don't exist, we only exist in relation to or in service to others. And so because we have so many webbed experiences, it's extra hard to break our own silence, because it involves other people, which we also don't want to hurt. So just know that it's a very enmeshed entanglement. It's not your fault for not being able to break silence. It's not your throat chakra, people. Okay. It's really a webbed, convoluted, deeply embedded constriction that is not only your own. And that web is real. So anyway, keep going to not expose
I think
others.
for me to talk about that would be to understand that for me, to your point, GuruNischan, I mean, I'm going to be very protective.
And
I
that's a
found,
beautiful thing. I want to say it's a beautiful thing to do that. It's never wrong to not be ready to speak names. Just want you to know.
I think the main part of it is to understand that I did not feel abused. And I felt comforted. Comfort's probably the best word, but I would also say I had my first orgasm when I was 7 or 8 years old. And I didn't know it was wrong to find comfort in other people at that age until I went on a sleepover after I left 3HO. Again, there was no exit strategy. There was no teaching me how to behave. And I attempted, in sharing a queen size bed with my friend, to share comfort. And she panicked. And in the middle of the night, her mother drove me home. I never saw her again, of course. I didn't know it was wrong until that day. And it was one of the, I mean, even to this day, I wish I could call her. Because it was so, God, I was so ashamed. But I didn't know. I really didn't know. And I behaved as I did when I also would sometimes share beds. And I didn't know. And again, I think the part that's so important for me is that we weren't monitored. We weren't holistically guarded. I didn't have a mom to run to and ask questions. You know, like there's so many people, especially adults, who are like, they all turned out fine. On paper as a whole, we look amazing. Many of us are incredibly high functioning. I have an amazing career. I have a great home. My son is epic. But at the end of the day, there are so many nuances and things that occurred to us that we had to learn, as opposed to, again, being able to just ask your mom. And or if your mom or dad were around, would the situation have even occurred? I don't think so. I hope not.
I also want to point out that one of the ways that we deflect from really facing our own experiences or examining 3HO properly, and the ashrams properly, and our particular yoga school or whatever group you find yourself in, is by doing this weird comparison to others, right? And so I just want to point out that this can also happen in an environment where you're sexually abused, not you, but someone is sexually abused, say by their parents, or within the household, or within the church. And when silence is the normal, and even if you speak out and you say something, but then you're shushed, these things, you grow up feeling like this is a normal thing. You don't know something's wrong. So this isn't unique to 3HO folks, but what Darci is pointing out is that within the context of of this community, and being in a position of having guardians, the child swapping, where parents were no longer the protectors of their own kids, oftentimes put in charge of other people's children that they didn't have that same emotional bond with. Lots and lots of violations occurred. Some were sexual, some were neglect, some were abandonment, some were hunger, some were physical, some were a combination. But if that's your normal, you ain't got nothing to compare it to. And then if the ethos of the teachings are, if you got a problem with your situation, then it's your problem, right? And as children, we're not just getting that, but the adults are getting it. So everything is reinforcing this outlook, which is why I find this keep up idea equals shut up is so interesting, because never have I equated the two. And yet I remember dating a guy decades ago who was not in 3HO, and I said something about keep up when he was expressing a hard time he was going through, and he literally interpreted it that like I was cutting him off, as if it was a shut up, because it's almost like a non-empathetic way of saying get over yourself.
100%. I mean, it's 100%. And much like horror, it's one of my things my father did up until he died. it's absolutely shut up. And, to take it back to the condition of our environment and me using foster care earlier, is it reminds me in hindsight of the horror stories you hear about foster families that took on tons of kids beyond their capabilities just to get the money.
Yep.
And I really don't know and understand the nuance of, again, were the guardians paid, were they given a stipend, but it wasn't about the money. It was about doing what he said, which was the form of currency. The form of currency in 3HO was getting in his good graces so that you could grow within a system. So, having multiple children, and we all had different situations. There were some children that, to your point, GuruNischan, were in very, very poor trailers. They had nothing. And then there were some in the middle trailer. I mean, there was also an economic system within the structure, and everybody's version of have and have not. Even when you think you have nothing, there's bottom levels of nothing. And we all had that.
Which creates a hierarchy of pain, right? It creates a hierarchy of trauma. And I think that's really relevant to the way that we communicate our pain or don't. So many of us hierarchize our pain as if it's, oh, we didn't go through that much.
Yeah. No, 100%. And again, we talked about that a little bit on the last one, but it's me saying I didn't go through India, thereby I don't get to speak. And it's every single system is unique of what each of us went through, whether it's the first Mary period, whether it's GNFC, then you go on, like it goes on and on and on and on. But at the beginning of it, and this is the part where I just want everybody to understand, like, how did we get here? How did we even get here? And please notice how loud the voices were in this OG group to get us where we are. Still fighting, still being the older kids and the guardians. And I know within that there are those who are going to say there were also, again, the bullies. It's a very muddy situation. And yes, there were some. I was one. I wasn't one in New Mexico, but I think that had I gone to India, I may have ended up there, because when I left 3HO, I was most assuredly one in my regular school. I didn't know how to handle any emotion except control through anger and violence. It was how I had control. And I had gone for years without any. And when I could control somebody who seemed weaker to me, it felt like the right thing to do. Which, again, in hindsight, I would have, if I had ever seen any indication of that from my child, the consequences. He'd be in therapy. I'd be apologizing to parents. We didn't have anybody to watch us to see this occurring. We only had people encouraging the hierarchy, because the ashram was a hierarchy. Who is stronger?
And the currency of Yogi Bhajan's attention, as you
The
talked
currency.
about.
Yes.
That is such a good languaging for it, because it truly is. Like if a phone call came in from him, done. If he was coming into town, everything dropped. The currency of his attention, the currency of his approval. So adults would strive to be in that currency, and the children to the wayside, right? And that was built into the teachings, because the children don't need you, because they're such strong souls without you, and you are all so weak. And so it only added to that divide of neglect the children, focus on me, and your parents are weak, focus on me, and kind of both directions of that.
Yeah. And again, in the letter I had read last week, so it was parents neglect the children because you suck. Basically, I mean, that's That's the
Yep.
non-fancy language of what he told them over and over. They sucked.
Yep.
And
They were
their job,
horrible.
they had delivered their job. They had given him the children of the future. And then you go into who got chosen for what guardian of what child, and how that currency related to your favor with him, your access to him. And it was just a trade program. We were bartered. And we were only as good as what our parents could contribute.
Mm.
And, you know, at the end of the day, I don't believe, because I think another common denominator when you look at most of us, again, I'm not saying all of us ever, because there are definitely people who we've all struggled in different ways. There is a level of, again, control, evenness,
Steady.
steady.
Strong as steel, steady as
Steady as
stone,
stone,
folks. Don't you
right?
forget it.
Yes, all of the mantras. And at the end of the day, too, I think a lot of us ended up being pretty damn good parents, which then makes our parents feel justified. See, you turned out great. Look at you. My father borrowed money from me until the day he died. I was so proud of how much money I was making. You know, they were justified.
Mm.
And they didn't understand it was not because of them, it was in spite of them, and it was because of us. We rallied together. We decided we would not, we decided it would be different. But then, as we know, and I'm sure you've talked about this, like some parents then chose to send their own children to the same school that they went to, that they were abused in. And that's a separate conversation that I hope somebody really digs into, because I think it's one of the biggest questions is, you know, why would you send your child to a school you were so abused at, or you witnessed so much abuse at? And it would be a great conversation, because I know for me, I went the opposite route. I did everything I could to make sure my son had the most normal childhood ever. But what I didn't know how to do, and I address this in order of importance, when I describe the impacts of my harm in order of importance, the number one is parenting. I made sure that everything was right. He had great school. He had a great education. He had the best birthday parties. I mean, the best. We did Boy Scouts. We went camping. We would ditch school to go on adventures to Washington, D.C., or wherever it was to have a good adventure. At the end of the day, I didn't know how to do the emotional part. I'm great. If you hug me, I have to count mentally in my head to make sure I don't pull away too soon. I don't cuddle. I'm not, I believe that the actions were enough, were amazing, in fact. But my son had the courage to tell me at 15, he wished I hugged him more. Talk about one of the days when this facade did crack. He had written me a letter. It was part of a thing he had done in high school where they had to write letters to their parents. And he let me know that I didn't show him enough physical affection. It broke me. I mean, it absolutely broke me. And that is when I started to change. Okay, I have to learn how to do this. Like, I have to learn how to hug my kid. And I realized at the time, I don't hug anybody. I will be next to you. I like this. But if I feel trapped, then that's where the bullying comes in. I want to hit you. I want to fight. I want to get away. My physical space is critical to me. But I had to learn that for my son to feel genuine love, his love language, I had to learn his love language. And I wish I had done it sooner. it's probably the biggest impact in my life was that I don't feel like I gave my son enough love in a way that he needed it. Let me clarify.
Yeah. Through emotional affection and
Yeah.
touching. There's just a couple of things in there, but one of them you brought up is, how does one send their children to a school, right, that they were abused? And I just want to pause there and just, first of all, acknowledge all of you who might have done that and how common it is. I want to think about the generational military families, generational boarding school families of alma maters where you absolutely had a history of abuse. But then what happens in abuse tolerant culture is it actually becomes a part of what makes us. So the form, how we do that is we actually, first of all, I just want to pause and say everybody's way of handling trauma or forms of control are very unique. You can actually grow up in the same household and have very opposite responses. One could be, don't touch me kind of person, and the other person could be the opposite. They're over cuddler. So how we deal with complex trauma and how you naturally respond to it is actually quite potent. And there's no one right way, even if you grew up under the same household. So acknowledging that all of our ways of response is still trauma response, right? And it's unique to our own system of dealing with it. And I absolutely agree with you. I think it would be a great conversation. I'd love to hear more from those who chose it. And I know that now is probably a tough time because we're probably looking at it through a different lens than you might have ever looked at it through before. Like, why did I do that? What was it for? And when we start to re-examine segments of our life through a new lens, a more informed lens, a less fragmented lens, you start to see a different picture. And all of that can be overwhelming. So thank you for that input. And thank you for speaking to the control mechanism. You went into the, I'm going to overgive to my son, make sure he has it as much normal. And somebody else might have been like, really embraced the difference, really embraced the fact that they are different, that we are different. And I know I was like that. I embraced kind of the rebel difference aspect as opposed to let me see how I can assimilate. And all of them are totally normal for all of us. It's just how we found our way through.
Yeah. And I would tell you, I mean, if my ex-husband had agreed, I would have sent my son to children's camp.
Interesting.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have hesitated. And I would tell you, in this, I was hungry. I was injured. It was not a good experience, but I would have 100% sent my son to children's camp if my ex-husband, who was very much not in 3HO, would have agreed to it. He was like, no, he's going to the YMCA camp. But, when I would explain things we did, my ex-husband would look at me and go, so Darce, no, not normal. And I was very lucky to have an ex-husband who very much stood his ground. And I even brought my son to Solstice one year when he was about 9. And I'm looking around the Solstice site, and it was so large to me. And I really looked at my little son, and I was keeping, again, I had shared that moments happened in my life where I remembered things as he hit those ages.
Yeah.
And I'm keeping him close to me because I'm looking at the vastness of the land, and I'm not letting him run off. And I was like, holy crap. Like, this was the space that before I was even this age, I just had carpe diem. And it was overwhelming to realize the scope of what that loneliness must have done.
Yeah.
But again, I get why people continue to send their children to the schools. I wanted to send my child because I believed 100%. Well, I didn't, and I would say the same for many of my friends. We didn't end up just as YB predicted. We didn't end up being drug addicts. We didn't end up being alcoholics. We were very disciplined. We were high functioning. look, you turned out great. On paper, to the common eye, yes, we did. And I saw my son and I was like, he would be strong going to this. This would be a good thing for him. But my ex-husband had the insight to know, because he's challenged me on it. He even had said to me before we were engaged that if I didn't go to therapy, it was the first time I went, if I didn't go to therapy to learn how to be angry, learn how to fight like a normal person, he would not move forward in our relationship. So I did. I thought he was an ass for saying it, but I loved him. And I didn't know I wasn't normal. When I switched gears into fight mode, I went to kill you. Verbally, physically, I hit, I punched. I had to learn to handle rage. I would be 95% steady and strong, but for that 5% was, I'm going to kill you.
Ballistic.
Yep. Ballistic.
So when he said with that line to you, Darci, that you don't fight normal.
Yes.
That's what he was getting at, that you basically turned into like a switch is flipped and it's like an unleash.
Absolutely. And then, by the way, the second I was done, I was done. I couldn't understand why you were still upset. Because I have this ability still, and even that I frame it as ability, right? Like it's a gift.
Right. Instead of trauma response.
I have this ability that I genuinely cannot remember emotion. I can remember events, as I've shared in both of these conversations. I can remember details that friends of mine have called me this week going, oh my gosh, how do you even remember all that? But I cannot for the life of me tell you how I felt yesterday. I can't recall feeling. So I would go into this rage mode, because that's what I also did as a child. And then I would be done. And I didn't understand why you were so, I still don't. I don't understand why anybody is still upset, because when I'm finished, I'm finished. I logically understand because, of course, right? I just did some sort of rage fest, which, by the way, I have not done in decades at this point. But I can't understand somebody holding on to energy or anger. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I absolutely know that goes to keep up, let go, move on. I don't care how much pain you were in this morning trying to do this, that, or the other, Utma. Move on.
Yeah, and it goes back to the emotion commotion.
Yeah.
The non-safety and actually feeling and having our emotions, which, folks, if you don't know yet, this is very, very linked to complex PTSD. So if you haven't gotten the book, the link will be in the show notes. But Peter Walker, the book is called CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. And his first book, which he recommends before reading this one, is called The Tao of Fully Feeling. So going into understanding complex trauma, the element of turning off our feelings and how much that was reinforced and still is within the ethos of the teachings around emotion, commotion, and neutrality, and this whole like fetishization of the sattvic energy, that kind of smooth, steady sattvic, as if we're not rajas and tamas too. We're all of these ranges, and we have to be able to have access to all of them. But when we're only taught to operate at one point, then when you're speaking to this, it sounds like you were steady, ballistic rage, and then done. And be like, what's all your problem? So this, for your love, for your partner to be like, yeah, you got to get therapy because what you're doing is not normal. Like that's the first time you're hearing that from the outside.
It was. And I was, he and I got together, started dating probably when I was about 23, 24. So I was probably about 23, 24 years old when I heard that for the first time. Again, I always feel like I owe, and sometimes I always feel like I have to make amends. Like I'm in AA, for emotion, because when I got into high school, I was 2 years out of a cult, which at the time I did not equate any balance to. here's me trying to be normal. And it's not like there was an assimilation class to how to behave, how to learn how to behave in normal social construct.
Yeah.
And I did crazy things in high school that were extreme. But they were also extreme in my ingrained habits. I remember not being willing to go to my boyfriend's prom. I mean, it was an overwhelming, guttural, I'm not pretty enough. I shouldn't be here. And it wasn't normal high school stuff. Like, I believed that. And then I would panic, and that's where that rage would come out. I would scream. I would say, don't do it, don't do it. Like, I would panic. He tried to just reference me in a yearbook, and I begged him not to. And ultimately he did not. He was just trying to reference me as somebody important in his life. And the idea of the attention, the idea that I was not worthy of this attention. This went on for years and years and years until my ex-husband, in basically it was him, it was therapy or goodbye.
Right.
And I chose therapy. But I can't, that 5 years in between, 6 years in between before I started, there was no way to adapt. And I'm sure other people have probably gone through that too, who've left 3HO. You think we're normal, but in that first thing I read, we were taught not to be normal. We were taught not to assimilate, not to blend in.
And there's such a pride in that,
Yeah.
I want to just pause and be like, how much of our sense of self, like, I don't know who else has gone through that, but for instance, your name is unique, right? And then wearing a turban or having long hair or having the name, there's a level of uniqueness that comes with it. And if you've always been taught to stand out, then who are you once you cut your hair? Who are you once you take off your turban or shave your beard or look like a normal, everyday, average American? I didn't realize the impact psychologically of what was going to go through me over many decades around this, because when exceptionalism is so a part of your core sense of self, but then you blend in as normal, and normal is the antithesis of consciousness, and all that's blended into our own sense of self. I think a lot of people oftentimes will cling to the teachings or the lifestyle because of that convolution, the convolution of wanting to be special.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's interesting because within 3HO, wear the same color, wear the same outfit, all have Khalsa, all have Singer car, right? So you're actually within 3HO supposed to blend, but it's designed that because you're in 3HO, you're special.
That's right.
And it's an impossible thing to balance emotionally when you come out, because all of a sudden your looks, how you choose to dress, how you choose to do your hair, it does suddenly matter.
And it's always mattered. We just have made it not matter, right? Like the whole thing you went on about not wearing tight clothes, even to this day, not covering your hair, what happens to you on a visceral level when you don't cover your hair. Or you said something like, when you wear white, you notice your system settle.
Absolutely. I went to the dry cleaner yesterday and I dropped off 15 shirts. 10 were white, maybe 10 plus.
Yeah.
And I had 3 black ones. I still wear white a good 75% of my life.
And I look at how many people say that have left 3HO or have kind of moved on and yet haven't changed their hairstyle much, still the kind of plain, simple, no bangs hairstyle. How many people, quote, have left but have never changed their vegetarian diet or even questioned it. And a lot of other, quote, lifestyle things that are so like bedrocked into our core self that we wouldn't even know how to start stretching into something else. I think feeling our emotions is one of those things, wearing our hair in different styles or different colors. Like for me, I didn't get bangs until a year ago, but I had been cutting my hair since I was in my 20s. And it it was only when it occurred to me that that unconscious teaching around not getting bangs lived in my psyche. And when I woke up to that, I think it was on a podcast. I was like, oh no. And I was like, I'm going to get bangs, because I had to do it almost for my own sense of like stretch into a new sense of self and let me see how this feels. And not realizing I was operating under indoctrination.
Yeah, for me, it was coloring my hair. I mean, you can't see it. You can. I've got all sorts of different colors going on my hair at any given time right now. But that was a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, and
the fear that comes up for me around coloring my hair, like I don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. I am so with you.
Yeah. And, you know, and that goes to, I was looking at my list because I promised you that, you know, we would go through some of those things. And I'm looking at the next thing I talked about was marriage, but I've already dabbled in that a little bit. And then number 3 was food and sleep deprivation. And I wrote down, it may seem strange that food and sleep are third, but there's no way to help someone who has never been hungry understand what it is like to be hungry for literally years of your life. How to understand that we were not even sleeping 5 hours a night as children, and how to explain that the combination of sleep deprivation, hunger, and extreme duress physically and mentally due to a child, when it's really all you know. My food issues continue to this day, and it talks about in children's camp, but I think part of it, that we were fed the same exact breakfast for weeks, for dinner, the same dinner. There was no nutrition. Diets were prescriptive by Yogi Bhajan in increments of 40 days. I don't even know what that was about, but it was a constant. I wrote a note. I have a friend who used to get strep throat, R8, as a child. She would be isolated in her trailer and have to eat kelp chapatis every day. Kelp chapatis from the TSA agent ascribing medical care. Kelp chapatis.
I want to read one of the lines you said. You're like, my food issues continue to this day. We were fed the same exact breakfast for weeks, oranges and old bananas and occasionally yogurt. For dinner, mung beans that were all served out of a white large bucket slopped into a bowl on the ground. They were warm. They were warm as there was no active refrigeration at the solstice site. There was no nutrition, none. We were starving. If you see photos of us, our eyes are sunken. We were told we couldn't eat animal crackers. There's that again. At the ashram, we were given limited food, and it all depended on who you were fortunate enough to live with. My guardians kept me on a very strict diet so I would not gain weight. Our calorie intake was well below 1,000 calories a day consistently. To know if a meal will come, let's see. I'm going to keep going this. In high school, I was anorexic. I hoarded, I binged, I panicked about food then and now. Will it last? Don't want it. It won't be there. To not know if a meal will come, and that often that meal depends on how well you behave, is too much weight for a child.
Yeah.
Pause. There is something really big here in this food deprivation. And I'm bringing it up because I'm really struggling a lot with food lately. And I didn't ever have a sense of an identity around struggling with food. I didn't ever identify as bulimic or anorexic or overweight or underweight or any of those things. I feel like that whole thing was just like a frozen glacier in my experience. But it's only been in the last year that I've been able to really identify that I think I'm in a constant state of starvation. Like I think I'm hungry all the time. And what I notice, and because I'm doing so much somatic therapy, and I'm bringing this up for all of us, I'm just giving you my testimony here. What I notice is sometimes I can notice my hunger, and then it goes away so fast, and I'm extremely high functioning during this process. And so one of the grievings that has showed up for me in therapy in the last 6 months has been the grief of how well I can function on nothing.
I'm nodding my head because I can go 2 days and not eat. And then I gorge. And I'm not hungry. I don't think I'm hungry. I don't feel it in my stomach. You know, I don't get the headaches. I hear people say, oh gosh, I missed a meal. And I'm like, what do you mean you missed a meal? I mean, I would tell you, even for me, and this goes to the kelp thing, as a child, I had severe constipation.
Me too.
I
My whole
still
life.
to this day,
Yeah.
sorry, this is graphic. I go number 2, maybe once a week if I'm lucky.
Mm.
And doctors are like, what? You know, when they ask the questions, and I'm like, my entire life. But as a child, it was noticed, but it wasn't, hey, let's change the diet. Hey, let's give her more food. It was, I needed to do crow pose over the outhouses. You know how hard it is to do crow pose over an outhouse and not think you're going to fall in? Because for everybody out there at children's camp, we had outhouses, holes in the floor to go to the bathroom, not functioning toilets. And those came later, but I was told I had to do crow pose.
It's such a good point, because I also had chronic constipation through my childhood and into my adult life. And I thought that was somewhat normal. It wouldn't, you know, it was just the last 15, 20 years that I've really like actively worked on whatever that tightness in my belly, hiatal hernia, all that kind of like repressed emotion that was living in my stomach. But again, you're bringing up, when there was a thing, there was no actual real remedy. There was no actual real treatment. There wasn't actually real addressing, no changing of the food or other changes. It was just your fault. You're not in the right position to poop.
Yeah. 100% my fault. And then it also, you know, and I touched on this last time, going back to food, depending on the luck of who you lived with. Because what you also learned, and what I got to learn, as I spoke to last time on my ranch access, was, oh, the closer you get to him, you get food. And not only food, but good food. Not this crazy regimented diet he had other people on, but meals. And to this day, I mean, to your point, food is a major issue for me.
Darci, I'm blown away on it. You know, I have to tell you that it was on the Zoom call where I heard another fellow second gen of my age, who I love, who I hadn't spoken to in decades, speak to her food challenges and speak to her own, you know, other relationship intimacy challenges. And suddenly I was like, well, I have all those things. I have those symptoms, but I would have never called them symptoms, because I'm not going to be a victim of my life. I would have never out loud said, oh, I have constipation. That's so normal. There are remedies you can do about it, right? But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to identify a thing. In fact, going back to this food thing, this first started coming into my awareness like 10 years, maybe in 2014, when I'm teaching Kundalini yoga. And I remember somebody saying something about food, going on your comment, and somebody says something like, oh, when I eat this, I get so much energy, or when I get this, blah, blah. And I just remember thinking to myself, I don't know if I've ever eaten anything and felt anything. And that's weird. Like, I didn't eat food and feel a burst of energy, or eat food and feel anything. If anything, my attitude was like, nothing can make you feel like anything. And that was kind of this first indicator, like, I don't think that's normal. I think food is supposed to actually do a metabolic process inside of you. But that was the first indicator to realizing that I couldn't feel.
Yeah, when people say something, again, people non-3HO, a friend will casually be like, oh, I have to eat something. Like, do you? But then that goes into my selective compassion, because I look at them and I'm judging them. Like, how do you not have the control? Why do you need to eat something? Cowboy up, you're fine. Keep up, let's go. We're moving. We're on our way to do something.
Get it together,
instead,
right?
I get quiet. That's my internal dialogue.
That's the inner judgment.
That's the inner judgment. But to the outside, I just get quiet. I'm like, all right, let's go get you something to eat. Are you eating? No, I'm good. I'll have a nice tea.
And this is such a really, what you're bringing up, it's such good fodder, because this realization around being hungry has made me realize that It's why dating has been so hard for me. What's the first question people ask when you date? Like, well, what do you want to do? Or what do you want to eat? And what I didn't know is that that question, what do you want to eat, actually triggers a very messy state inside of me because I have no idea what I want to eat. Because going back to a choice, right? We didn't get choices. And so therefore, whatever that mechanism of a normal state of feeling hungry, choosing to eat, eating it, this normal, healthy development is so subjugated in my own energy system that the simple idea of, oh, I'm recognizing hunger pains, not squeezing them into something else so that I don't feel them, which is an unconscious default process in my body. It's a form of trauma response when you grow up in food insecurity. But I wouldn't have named my lifestyle food insecurity. I wouldn't have called it that, even though I knew we were on these special diets, because I still held that nostalgic place that these diets were special and unique and good for us.
Mhm. And I still do. I they're in me. I still I again I use my non-3HO friends for correlates.
Yeah.
I had to convince some of my best friends. We have family dinners. I've created a tribe outside 3HO as well that I love. I've mentioned it. They're a core group of people that are amazing. And I just was like, can we ever do Indian? And a whole bunch of like, I don't like the smell. And I was like, okay, so can I just choose a place? And we went to Indian. And during the course of the meal, I was explaining food. And it seems crazy that in LA I'm having this conversation, but I was. And we were at a restaurant called Badmash, which is amazing if you're ever in LA. And for me, that's my mac and cheese. That's my comfort food.
It's my potatoes.
Yeah, that's my mashed potatoes. And I get so excited when I eat Indian food, but I don't know how you eat it at a restaurant because I want to eat it on the ground, forkless, dipping everything into a chapati or a naan. But I get this stillness about me from the longer meals, which to me were like the best meal of the week. But it creates again this difference where within 3HO world, such normalcy. Non-3HO world, you realize you have that, I at least have that hesitation. Okay, fork. Use a fork when you eat this. You're in a restaurant, Darci. Like going through this checklist of assimilation in the outside world. But I also, when I eat Indian food, that is when I gorge. If I were to come home with korma, masala, a whole thing, I will eat it all and then I'll eat the rest for breakfast. I lose my boundaries. And again, I can hear these people and these non-3HOers or joiners who are going, see, none of that's so bad. I do that with Italian food. I do that and mitigating the impact of this. But it's understanding the sequence that each one of these things, little by little by little by little, has compounded to take pieces of our heart and our identity that we never got back.
That's right. It's our essence that never got developed. The essence just got frozen over like a glacier. And there are large amounts of rocks and bedrock and other levels of earth that have been piled onto that early innocence.
Yeah. And so I think I appreciate you wanting to dig into the food part because again, it all matters.
It matters so much. And one of the things I think I want to add on top of that is when spiritual abuse is added on top of fundamental basic needs of food deprivation, love deprivation, touch, attention, being delighted in, being secure, being safe, being seen, being heard. So there's certain basics of development. And I've been learning a lot more in therapy around these things. But there's something called betrayal trauma. And there's a whole book on this motherfucker, right? And y'all got to listen because it's so powerful to hear these concepts so that we don't keep minimizing what's happened to us, because the early developmental time affects our brain and body relationship and all of the mechanisms that happen between our brain and body. And to bypass that is missing out on a critical point of actually what happens in early childhood development and what happens, why it continues to go today, because something as simple as, oh, I'm hungry. Well, you're going to eat for the rest of your life. So until we actually, or you're not, right? Until we actually go into, you think time heals it, but no, these are parts of me that I've never felt. And what's blowing my mind is that if I didn't learn to start feeling this, I would just be a more high functioning version of this with more ulcers, more arthritis, more of the things that I would keep swallowing and compacting in my body, as opposed to slowing it down and being like, why do I have so much inflammation when I drink water, or whatever. And so again, I didn't have an identity around being hungry. This has only recently emerged. And I find that so fascinating, where other people might have had real food issues their whole life. You might be the one like me, like, no, that ain't my problem, until you realize something else has to melt before you can actually feel that next layer of yourself. And for a good reason, because survival is survival. And I'm discovering my body doesn't feel hungry to help me.
My body never feels hungry. I do not feel hungry. And again, I can, this is where I think for me, I would say having a therapist who understands cults has been so critical to me.
I can't,
because I have never discussed food with another therapist, because it just seems like, quite honestly, a personal failing of mine that I need to just get past. So much of this is my inability to have relationships. Well, that was because my mom and dad were my mom and dad. My inability to,
pause. The amount of second gen that I've heard say that, right? That the problems I have is because my parents were la da 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 da, right? And how untrue that is around like the non-safety of relationship. Again, the last 2 years, I've really been able to wake up to, through the lens of CPTSD, why intimacy and relationship with a friend or with a partner has turned on every alarm bell inside. And so I pushed them away in judgment.
100%. And that's where as we discussed therapy, if you can get a cult therapist who has somebody knowledge of it, it's an epic change. I learned many years ago, and it was in my therapy for my marriage, that my love language, if you haven't read that book, I love it. Love languages. My love language is acts of service. It's not acts of touch. It's acts of service. I show you love by doing something for you. I show you love by acting. I actually prefer that. I would tell you one of the best gifts I ever got was an ex-boyfriend. I had to be at work very early and I hadn't gotten gas. And I woke up in the morning early to go get gas. And he was like, I took your car last night and I filled your tank. I was like, that was like a diamond necklace. I couldn't believe that somebody would do that for me. I couldn't accept it. I loved it. It was amazing. But my point being, I want to pull this all together in the sense of just reminding people who are listening and taking the opportunity to listen. Just because we as second gen seem so normal, seem so strong, and I resent that word, by the way.
Strong, it's a good one.
I hate that word.
The amount of times I had a student come up to me once when I was teaching, and she said, you're a really amazing teacher, and you're so strong, but I think that strong is a bit much. And it was like the first time that I heard, like, what? Anyway, keep going.
Right. But it's to just understand that we are all a result of these experiences that bit by bit took parts of us. And 3HO Yogi Bhajan has responsibility for that, period. And I struggle when I hear anybody try to take that away from us. Our parents, so back to what we just said, my mom and dad didn't raise me. 3HO did. Happy, healthy, holy. Not so much. Unhealthy. I was very unhappy. And holy is subjective if you think the TSA agent did a great job of explaining Sikhism to us. I'm not sure.
And giving us this, inflated false version of it that makes us think that we're the elite of the original teachings that include Kundalini yoga. I mean, the convolution of that puts us at an elite segment above the Indian Sikhs in general. I mean, the whole thing just starts to get extra convoluted. And our parents, even if they did keep us in their household, they weren't raising us.
No.
Because that's what it means to grow up in a cult. It's what it means to grow up in an ethos where effectively our parents gave over their will, which means they were no longer making choices on our behalf or on their own behalf. And so as children, to be born into that level of environment, we're emulating emptiness. We're emulated perfected disassociation in a way, because our parents became disassociated as their own mechanism of complex PTSD, whether they recognized it or not. And then we just are mimicking that because we're just trying to get some basic love, attention, food. And we learned very young we had to perform for food, perform for approval. And I liked what you said, that you learned pretty quickly, the closer into his parameter, not just did you eat, but you ate good. You got to go to good restaurants and get gorged in food and other types of things. So going back to the idea that YB was the currency, being in his environment was the currency. That's when somebody called to say, I want you to become my secretary. People ended their lives and flew. You listen to Sat Pavan, she went at 16 because that's what was the privilege of being asked. Like, you don't know. Her parents supported it. She supported it. How come? That's the currency.
Yeah. And then you even add in, I was thinking about the fact that my father was, up until he died, my father was very, very low income. I mean, up until he passed away, he had been living in New Haven. I, myself and other friends would send him money so he could get to solstice, because there was nothing more important to him than getting to solstice every year, because he wanted to do the blind walk. Right? But he believed it. And my father was dying.
That is so symbolic, by the way. That's just so, the symbolism is unreal.
Absolutely. But I think about the fact that I would be sending my father money while he was still sending Yogi Bhajan money. Well, I might as well have written him a direct check. No matter where you were, you felt here he was continuing to grow his lifestyle.
Yeah.
And people, no matter their income level or not, were sending him their money. Yeah. And, I add that in because in the spirit of finance, this is something my therapist helped me understand, and I didn't write it in the statement I wrote, but it's the financial insecurity. And I mentioned it earlier. I work. I am a workaholic. My boss constantly is like, Darci, stop working. I'm afraid to not work. And I'm afraid to not have health care. It's a fear-based thing. I wish I could take vacations. Like I'm afraid to. And I equate that to the financial. My therapist actually helped me understand when I was commenting on it so casually one day. And she was like, Darce, that absolutely is growing up in an ashram environment where you give and give. You feel selfish. You feel like you don't deserve it. I should be helping the community. And it's ingrained that I'm not allowed to live at a certain lifestyle.
Yeah.
And that I have to work harder and harder. And again, it's just all of these things that have impacted most of us.
So true. Oh my God. The the working, the always busy, the pressure, forced to keep up the pace of a teenager. So like that's the early experience, but the pace, I want to kind of say how that pace goes on throughout life. And it's somewhat like what you're talking about. It's the overwork. It's not being able to settle, because there's always more that needs to be done. And I've noticed that energy in me for so long, but never knew what it was. And it would felt like this pulse that was so fast, but it wasn't at my heart. It was at my rib cage. So it was like kind of in my belly. And I've never linked it before until these last couple of years around the financial, the inner kind of constant running, the constant, the inner pace.
The constant need to contribute to the whole. That's part of being a part of an ashram or a compound. Again, you and I both were very laughing a little bit about how early we both wake up every day. I wish I knew how to sleep in. I wish I knew how to actually relax. I envy people who do. I really do. I envy them. I genuinely get jealous watching people know how to take time off and enjoy it.
Yeah. Have peace and joy.
Yeah.
I've had to train myself to sleep in, folks. I mean, there were 2-3 years straight where my active daily practice, my daily practice was practicing sleeping in. And I would wake up early at 4 or 5 in the morning, and then I would actively practice, take a hot bath. And then I would lay back down. Then I'd put something over my eyes, and I'd put earplugs in. And they were just doing a series of things to retrain my system. Now, I do think I'm a natural early riser. But the ability to actually, like I've had to do a lot in therapy, to actually learn how to not wake up frantic. So wake up like alerted.
Yes.
And
Yes.
oh, Jesus, like what is that? And it reminded me of the energy at 3:30 a.m. in any ashram when all the adults were gasping to try to get to sadhana to be one of the people.
I'm smiling because I don't think I've ever thought of it like that, but you're right. Unfortunately I have had the men I've been in relationships with, my ex-husband and my ex-boyfriends, have all been late risers and have been, and I've been like, I don't expect anybody else to get up. It's just me. But I get up like I'm ready. There's no ramp time. I am 0 to 100 the second I wake up, and I wake up very early. And it's unsettling. And I think the thing is it's unsettling for other people. I don't, I have to again, I use my Myers-Briggs, I use my T to train myself to, okay, get up, have a routine that even though you don't need it, recognize what the impact you have on the people around you if your energy is not right. And train yourself to not carry that energy that you created your whole life to survive forward into other people's lives to force it upon them.
Yeah, it's like bursting it out into other people as if it's a normal state, but really it's a high revved engine. And our high revved engines we've been told that they're, peaceful white Cadillacs, but they're not. They're high speed racer engines, and so I think that's some of the convolution between self and the identity, the cult identity that's been placed on us, that we think is our personality. We think all these things are uniquely our own. And we start to hear, whoa, you do that, but in an interestingly, slightly adapted way. Oh, you do that too? It took me a long time to get out of the habit of cold showers for me, because I could really see how it supported my day, and it brightened everything. And it kind of kept that morning pace up to be more productivity. And I could tie it all into personal development and success, success traits, instead of looking at them as trauma patterns, right? So for most of my life, I used them as my high achievement methodology. And then it doesn't help, as we talked about last episode, that the world starts making it extra trendy, right? So now cold showers and cold plunges are all the rage, but it doesn't change. That popularity out there doesn't change my need to learn how to regulate inside my body. So wanting to change that frantic, pressure-induced way of moving through the world does take therapy. It does take other people seeing you and helping you learn how to adapt and make links between ways of operating and where that thing might have come from growing up in a cult environment.
Right. Right. And again, is it okay for you to carry it forward? Again, there are things that work for each of us. We talked about this last time. You don't have to disavow things that bring you comfort. It is okay and safe to have comfort in things and routines or patterns that don't pose harm. It's not all or nothing. And I think that that's where also some of us have struggled with the judgment we've gotten. It's you can be a hybrid in 3HO. You can be out, you can be in, you can have your whole name, you can have part of your name. You can do whatever the fuck you want. And because we didn't make this choice for ourselves. Right. Adults who chose to enter and chose to follow rules. We did not. So we get to manifest this however we damn well please. And with the full support of one another and whatever that looks like and whatever that sounds like. And the same thing for the adult. And I can't believe this because here's me, I'm 50. I'm an adult and I still say I'm a second gen kid.
And we have to differentiate it.
I have to differentiate. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, and this is what I was also thinking about from last week, just the judgment has to stop. But I think for the judgment to stop, the conversation has to continue. And as we discussed today, there are things I'd love to learn about for me to take my selective compassion out of my own head. And because we have it and understand, I would love to seek to understand and listen to some of the whys. And I think also for any adult who's joined consciously, intentionally, to understand that though you may hear some stories and some history that are as simple, that I don't even mean just using the word simple, that was assholic, that are, I had a bad education. Go, well, you could have had a bad education here. Or I had this with my parent. And then you mitigate it and you reduce it and you reduce the trauma and the impact of it. That's you doing keep up is shut up. So yeah, keep up and shut up. If you're going to keep doing that and mind your business, if you don't have a willingness to hear the conversation.
Thank you for that. And remember that you may do your trauma response as a coping mechanism for the rest of your life. And it's just okay. It's okay. You want to know why it's okay? Because it's what you need. Like the reason we do what we do is because we need it. And so you definitely don't want to go on this self-attack, not doing these things. And it's all the more reason why we absolutely need therapy. We got so indoctrinated out of getting a therapist. So if you're facing kind of this, I'm a loser, I'm a failure, if I get therapy, I get it. And get one anyway, especially one in a cult, because the amount of layers that you think are your personal problem, your personal soul journey, they just start. So many of these things are actually symptomatic of our complex experiences, whatever range of experiences you had from growing up in this community and this cult. And I want to go through a couple of them before we wrap up, and so that you get to talk on it. But you talked about you don't want to get noticed out of fear of attention.
Right.
We talked about the sexually strained peer environment, boundaries, lack of boundaries, the lack of boundaries as normal, the range embedded, working all the time, the afraid to be sensual, kind of like staying where you're concealing your body, the idea that strong is not something that is a compliment to you, the master of being fine, and even that violation, when we have certain levels of violation, especially like when we're touched early, we are comforted in violation. So this is a really important thing that is a very convoluted thing that we can take as a personal response, but it's not, is that when we have an early set point where violation is normalized. So for me, that became normalized to have chiropractors or healers touch me in an inappropriate way was a normal thing to me. And I didn't know it was normal. But several times in my adult life, those things continued to happen to me. And it was only in the last couple of years that I linked it to the fact that in 3HO, we didn't have body autonomy. We had lots of strangers that were in charge of us regularly.
And touching our bodies.
And touching our bodies and watching us. The way you brought up adults watching us in the shower was a really interesting point. But I also want to point out that anybody who as an adult went back to Solstice or European Yoga Festival like me knows that all the broke people are the ones that are doing Seva. So meaning we have to do we're all doing Seva. Let me qualify that. Everybody's doing Seva. But the broke people are doing work exchange. So a lot of us are actually attending, going back to like your father to pay for Solstice. Many of us couldn't afford Solstice in adult life, yoga students. And what do? We're work exchanging. Well, what is one of the work exchanges? Children's camp. Yeah. So what does that mean, folks? Think about that. It means that people are volunteering that are too broke to pay for these things themselves. And it's why cults, religious cults and other types of cults attract pedophiles and other abusers, because nobody's watching these children. And it just becomes a built-in part of the ethos that children are touched inappropriately because nobody's watching. So if that's normal to you as a kid, you grow up either touching and doing inappropriate things to others, as your story shared, or we allow violation and even magnetize it because there is a normalcy. And then we actually judge healthy boundaries. So I remembered a couple years ago learning about consent and finding myself quite irritated at it. Like, why do they got to ask everything? Can I touch your hand?
Me
Can
too.
I touch your elbow?
I love that you're saying that. I felt exactly the same way. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I did. I judged it. I will be honest, I judged #MeToo. I was so judgmental of the Me Too movement. I couldn't even understand it, which is crazy because I went to an incredibly powerful all-girls high school in Los Angeles. That was my transition, by the way. I went from the have-nots to the haves in 2 years. And but it's a school that has turned out multiple major female leaders in the world who refer to the high school easily. And who were very Me Too movement. And I was like, stop whining. Handle it. Don't allow it. And it's shitty.
It really is. It really is.
Shitty. And it's the selective compassion.
The untreated medical issues, the forced keep up, I think this is such an important thing, because what it essentially we're talking about here, Darci, is we're talking about how well we've learned to override our own instincts and our own needs. And when we aren't feeling ourselves, we can override because we're actually tending and reading the environment. So we're not including ourselves. And it's such a powerful survival mechanism that actually eliminates our own self. And if that's normal, you don't know you're doing it. So if that becomes the basis of your personality, it's a powerful thing because you're constantly pouring out into others and uplifting others, but at the expense of you, but you wouldn't know that because you never had the you in the first place.
Well, and then that's where, again, the linkage, right? So even taking the Me Too. So we're strong, which means we don't allow things to happen to us, because if we allowed things to happen to us, we can't talk about our childhood. So we're strong. So instead, we don't allow it. It's so interwoven into our psyches.
Yeah.
And it can come across, it's not that I'm consciously, as an example, I'm not consciously out loud going, you allowed this. I'm just feeling it inside. It is therefore impacting my course of action. It is impacting my lack of sympathy. I'm staying quiet because I've trained myself to stay quiet because I do know better. I know what I'm thinking is wrong. So I've learned to shut up, but I have to condition myself not to feel it, not to react to it. So therefore, my face often lacks the emotion of what I'm feeling. I don't cry. I don't, I mean, I cry over things that I can't control. Like you heard this last time, I cry over animals. I don't cry over people. And that goes to me to what you were just saying.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So Darci has brought us into some really interesting topics. I'm going to ask you to go back right to your impact statement and share with us some more of your just everyday lived awarenesses of waking up to your own reality.
Okay. So I did the impact statements as I was writing this, and I did it in order of importance. Earlier, what I read was the overview, and these were to me, the most important thing, how they impacted me, again, in importance. So first off was parenting. My son was 7. He asked me to make toast. I hesitated as I wasn't sure I wanted him handling electricity. I was in my kitchen and like a ton of bricks hitting my body and my stomach. I had the complete emotional memory of that. I was that age when I was sent to live alone. I lost my mom because a man decided that children would be better off without parents. I lost my childhood. In some new test kitchen on 100 acres in New Mexico at 7 years old, I was alone. Here I am in 2006, questioning if my son should make toast. In my son's early years when he was 4, my then husband and I started family therapy. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I did know that my instincts were wrong. I needed to learn how to be a mom and how to actively parent. I needed to learn that my son didn't need to sort it all out and that he wouldn't be just fine. If I didn't become a mom, I needed to learn empathy and sympathy as I had none. I needed to learn to participate and show love openly. I needed to learn that he deserved to hear my love. I needed to learn to be open and at school functions and feel safe asking my friends questions on the hows. I had no context about simple things like at the PTA or making a lunch. I needed to learn that the education, quote unquote, I received wasn't one. And I didn't know how to act or behave with basic things like homework and play dates. And what type of gifts do I send to a party? These most basic, everyday common sense things had no context in my world as I lacked the history. The hardest part of the years of family therapy was to learn how to show my son consistent, genuine love and how to take what I knew, I felt, and communicate it to him. I would add one thing to that because it was, I remember being humble enough to ask friends questions. But one of the most embarrassing things in my life was, as my son was in school, I had to email his teachers and explain I didn't know how to do his homework and try in my very best way in this very, very perfect community that we were living in, white picket fences and all, explain to teachers that I had this, I would call it an alternate upbringing, and that I didn't go to traditional schools, and try to find the teacher who would be kind enough to help me because I really didn't know how to do first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. I didn't know how to do it with him and help him. I didn't know how to make a diorama. So that was something from parenting. I then go into marriage and relationships. I was dating a man who would become my husband. He looked at me one day in the middle of one of our fights and said, "Darci, you don't fight like a normal person. If you don't get help, I can't continue." I had no clue. I did know that I had lost a 4-year relationship with a great man for the same issue. However, I thought that was his fault for not loving me enough to take the abuse when I got angry. I was angry. I fought like my life depended on it. I physically hit. I emotionally poked to incite. I hit over and over, daring men to hit me back. I would scratch, bite, and throw objects at you. My rage so embedded in my very being that I had no ability to control it when I was angry. I wanted to fight with every ounce of my soul. That was a pattern that started in the ashram when I was beat up by an older bully over and over. So when I would get hit, I followed suit. I started personal therapy. We started relationship therapy. I knew and believed that people always leave and that I would be sent away if I didn't act right. So I set up each relationship preparing to be abandoned. Ultimately, this was a cycle for my entire adult life. There's a saying, damaged people are dangerous because we know we can survive. I was that person. We need to survive manifested from the time I lost control at 7 and beat up to the first time to gradually ensuring to not being on the receiving end of it myself, so I would become the attacker. I distinctly remember the first time I was beat up in Espanola by XYZ person. He had my leg in a hold I couldn't escape. I flipped back and my head hit a rock. And in that moment, I was never again going to let any man get the better of me. It started a cycle that lasted until I was 38, and I was arrested for assaulting my then husband. The judge gave me anger management therapy, and in all of my therapies, I had never done anger management specifically. Until then, I didn't know I was angry. I thought I was fine. I learned how to be angry and allow it without feeling like it was a failure to feel. I don't believe in marriage as a concept. At 12 years old, I was at the ranch, and Yogi Bhajan had taken a personal interest in me. He personally brought me before him and engaged me. I felt special, so honored. The ranch was the Espanola home of Yogi Bhajan. I've actually already gone into all of this. He personally assigned us. He knew that if we knew that if he knew who liked who, he would assign you to someone else. I was engaged to a 17 or 18-year-old boy. The arranged marriages had nothing to do with love. And that set a foundation for me that marriage wasn't about love. It was an arrangement, business. There was no romance, no falling in love. This framed every single relationship I ever had. I've always been with men who are not monogamous and cheated on me. Then when I found out, I just accepted it as if it was okay and that it's what I deserved. I always felt that as I was taught in 3HO through years of YB lectures, that it is my job, my role, my place to acquiesce and abide by what the male wants.
That is such a good point. I'm just going to say some things. Infidelity as normal. My instincts were wrong. I learned to emotionally poke to incite, right? That is embedded rage. I knew and believed everyone always leaves. How deeply embedded. I definitely agree that my sense of love was that everyone that I love leaves. So love is not safe. That was an unconscious thing.
It was not safe to put in to allow yourself to love, because then you would get hurt and they would leave anyway.
And they would go away. And so I just would rather not need anyone or anything and be strong within myself. And that's who I am.
And I want to qualify it because I speak to the anger so much. Like I said earlier, that 95% of the time you wouldn't know I have this rage in me. But when that rage blew, when that kid flipped me and had my leg in a hold, so the situation that, and I will share this openly, the situation that led to the assault on my ex-husband was my ex-husband had realized after 17 years he was gay. And I walked in on him with another man in our home in bed, and I went to kill him. I mean, and there was this moment, and admittedly, of course, he was hella stronger than me. And, but I went from 0 to rage. If I got mad, there was no in between.
Well, that's pretty traumatic. So I can understand that.
It's traumatic, but I went from 0 to rage. And I went from 0 to rage when I got mad, period.
Yeah.
And that was traumatic, but I just want to qualify that the assault thing had a caveat of a fairly extreme situation, but then go into, once again, for years, I had been tolerating that quietly, not saying a word. I knew. I didn't say anything, but I knew.
And I don't know you personally, Darci, but I do want to add on to the added convolution of that level of sexual repression, the normalcy of being in a marriage. It's like, how does something like that happen? Well, I'm not talking your situation, but in general, when you grow up in such repressed, convoluted sexuality environment, where you're supposedly learning Kundalini yoga, which is the science of your sexual energy. And we're not actually learning that. We're learning a false form of that with a lot of sadist sexual terror happening underneath the surface. And there was tremendous amount of normalized infidelity because so many arranged marriages happened without there being love, and the real loves lived amongst each other. So that level of repression and manipulation only breeds future convoluted marriages where we're not noticing it, right? So how do you end up marrying a man who's actually gay, and all the stories? It's not unique to you.
Right.
All I'm saying is, how do I end up repeating a marriage
Right.
where the husband cheats on me, is an alcoholic, does all the same exact things that the environment I come from? It's because we repeat because of that safety, right? There's
Right.
a form of normalcy to that convolution.
And you consider allowing it for yourself. You do allow it for
You
yourself.
do allow it.
Because again, back to we were taught to acquiesce. We were taught to shut up. And so I tolerated it for too long. And I would say qualified to this day. He's one of my best friends. We got through it.
That's so cool.
He actually told the judge, the reason I didn't get in trouble, he told the judge what happened.
Damn.
Because we both went too far.
Damn.
But by the same token, it was also too far that we were too many years into me allowing that was okay for me to have as love in my life.
Yep. That was enough, right? That was enough.
It was enough.
Even though it was empty and not fulfilling and all the things.
But you stay married.
Acquiesce.
Next up is
that was a good word.
Food and sleep deprivation. It may seem strange that food and sleep are third. There's no way to help someone. Oh, I said that part. My food issues continue to this day. In children's camp, we were fed the same exact breakfast for weeks: oranges and old bananas and occasionally yogurt. For dinner, mung beans. These were all served out of a white bucket slopped into a bowl on the ground. I think I may have read this already.
Yeah, I highlighted that part.
Okay, so let me skip that one. I think I stopped though. No. Education. Starting in the Dorchester Ashram for 1st and 2nd grade, we were in a Montessori system. We were brought in as a group in a van daily, which again, in hindsight, is just so culty. Here we all were in our little white turbans, heading in our little large Jeffrey Dahmer van to the Montessori school. We alternated between going to school in Boston and being schooled at the ashram. The period was short-lived, and in Espanola, we did a mail order system. It was the 70s, 19 version. That was a 1970s version of homeschooling. All of us, regardless of age, taught in a single trailer by a man and a woman without teaching credentials to my knowledge. We were allowed and encouraged to study mostly what we each loved. The range of grades in the single trailer room was from 2nd to 9th grade. With 2 teachers, it was near impossible feat to ensure we received proper education. When I left 3HO in 7th grade, my mom had no records of the school system that Los Angeles would accept. As well, she was changing my last name so 3HO couldn't find me. Both didn't work. They found me. This happened repeatedly, so I had to test to gain entry, and I was held back a year. I didn't know proper cursive. My written skills were inadequate and not age skilled. My math was rudimentary, and I couldn't solve and show work. I had no science. The worst part was not actually the inadequate education. The worst part was I had zero ability to relate to other children in a structured environment. My first year out, I spent more time in the principal's office for beating up peers than not. I was angry. I didn't understand anything about being a friend. I didn't know how to make a friend, and I didn't know how to hold one. I was ostracized all the way through high school. I had no reference to normal history, so conversation and how to behave at a birthday party were unknowns. So I fell to my place and I became a bully. I binge ate. I stole food from people's lunches, as I still lived in fear that food wouldn't be there. I hit, I kicked, I bit. My inability to relate and have normal friendships carried deep into high school. For 3 years, my father and some random 3HO friend would show up and would find me in some school in Los Angeles and take me back to New Mexico. I would go back to Espanola for periods in and out until 8th grade, and I would beg my mother to let me stay because it was safe for me. There was my naive self wanting to be in New Mexico. My friends there felt safe despite any bullying. Life outside 3HO was terrifying. I desperately wanted to be in India. In New Mexico, as Uma, I was normal. In Los Angeles, as Darci, I wasn't. In high school, I attempted to follow standardized education norms, but I struggled as I couldn't wrap my head around the confines of the expectations. So if I loved something, I was engrossed in it. If I had no context, I simply failed the class. That was how I learned from my earliest wage: do as I want, because no one's going to change that. I would also add there, though, that in high school, I got very lucky, and I found several people, including my best friend Paige, who I call her parents, mom and dad. And I had friends who became patient to teach me. At school itself, I didn't know how to structure. I didn't know how to, I didn't understand clique dynamics. I didn't understand how to do so much. And I engrossed myself into theater, which was really helpful. And I found some amazing people who are still in my life to this day. And I say that to qualify that loyalty, as we discussed in the last call, is so important. And I have some amazing, amazing people in my life who were patient and taught me how to normal.
Yeah, I just want to speak to your no man's land, just kind of like the in
Yeah.
between, of over here you felt normal, over here you weren't, but you were trying to assimilate. So this, it's something that's so unique to cult survivors and children of cults, that once again, Darci's advice to get a therapist that's familiar with cult can really help us break down some of these really crystallized forms of false identity that have been curated inside of us.
So the next one is sexuality. And again, I'm going to edit on this one. But when you are 7 and 8 and the environment you are in is without parents and there are no parameters to guide right and wrong, and the attention and comfort you get is crawling into beds or on sofas with other girls, as you get older and older, your view of sex is formed. Your cuddles turn sexual and it's comfortable and it feels good, so you allow it. Orgasms feel good. Sexual, I don't like how I wrote this.
I like it. I was just going to say it out loud. Sexual abuse made me feel loved. And I think what I like about saying that is it just goes back to, it's not abuse until you understand that it's abuse. So it made it, it's a form of touch and comfort and nourishment.
It is. And it's crazy. Oprah is who taught me that. I heard it on an episode of hers. When you are friends with a beautiful 14-year-old, hold on a second. My plug came undone. 2 seconds. So sexual abuse made me feel loved. When you are friends with a beautiful 14-year-old girl being groomed, and she has chosen to be a secretary of Yogi Bhajan, and you both get to stay at the ranch, and you see that she gets beautiful things and treats and special food for being the next secretary, because it was very clear, that's a goal. When you watch a beautiful 18-year-old Kartapudik over and over again be led to a room without the main house and followed minutes later by Yogi Bhajan, and she is given the most beautiful jewels and clothes and treatment, you think, be her. What do I have to do? I knew she would leave the room crying after he left because I waited for her. I knew she had bruises, but it was Yogi Bhajan, so whatever was happening had to be an honor, right? When I was brought in to see Yogi Bhajan at 12 and he personally engaged me to an older teen, I felt special. I mean, he personally assigned me to a man. It was a very big deal. Many people in 3HO had no access to him. I had earned all access. And when I heard lectures at women's camp that Yogi Bhajan gave on the role of women to serve the man, I understood. When he spoke of rape, that if it happened, it was the fault of the woman, I believed him. My sexual development was that I was not in charge of my femininity, and my sole goal was to serve whomever showed me the attention. This guided my entire adult life. I don't hug. I don't allow intimacy. I do not trust anyone with my body. I continue to find myself in relationships with misogynists. And when you are told being gay is wrong by the teachings of Yogi Bhajan and your mom ends up a lesbian, you find yourself embarrassed and even disgusted, as this forms an irreversible break in you. I cover my body as I was taught to do, and I do not allow myself any sexual power as we were taught. And that is all what the man wants.
So good.
The last one is the Guardians program. In the guardianship program, I was lonely. As a child, I was firmly lonely. I was generally unsupervised, except the extensive chores to do, and the neurotic overkill of pushing my very young body to do perfect yoga poses that strained and hurt me for hours. I had additional ice cold showers as punishment. I was allowed to eat only after the birth children of my guardians. I ate Uncle Sam's cereal with warm goat milk over and over when I was allowed breakfast. It was all I was allowed. The kids had great meals. I know I cooked them. For dinner, after the main family ate, I was allowed to eat. I was gaunt. I was malnourished. I was slapped. I was sleep deprived. I didn't even remember when my birthday was for years. I stole food if we went into town, and my guardian would smell my breath once she caught on, and then I would be punished with no food, physical abuse, or both. I taught myself not to laugh or make noise because if I did, I was punished. I was not allowed to have joy in that home. In addition to the goats, we had a dog named Maharani. She was an attack dog and often had me cornered. It was known that I couldn't be outside my trailer if she was in the yard, or I would risk myself, and that to do so was really on me. What I learned in the Guardian program was stay. I have lost the page, so.
It's okay. It was stay silent and take whatever happens, because if you talk back, laugh, or react, it is worse. To this day, I don't laugh out loud.
Sad. I've thought about that this week. I've always called myself Wednesday Addams, like it's a reverse joke and that I'm proud of it.
Wow.
I read, there was a line that I heard in a song. It's Iris is by the Goo Goo Dolls. When you bleed just to know you're alive. And in high school and in junior high, I would literally dig just to feel pain and dig into me, hoping I would bleed. Because if I bled for just 1 minute, I could feel something because I was trying to learn to feel. So I think that to understand the loneliness and the impact of the loneliness, at least on me, and by loneliness, I would qualify that to say, I loved my mom. I did love my mom. My mom ended up an addict, and I absolutely believe 3HO chased her into it. But I came from a loving woman who joined just to be near me. And missing her love changed me. It changed me irrevocably.
Yeah, so true. So true. There's a few more things you go into here, Darci, around physical and medical and survivalist mentality. Are you done, or do you want me?
I think for me, I think I may have missed a page, GuruNischan. So if you want, as long as there's not names, if you want to.
I'm going to just read a couple of these lines. I feel like what Darci is doing so well here is encapsulating her vulnerable experience that she hasn't been allowed to have in these words. And I think it can help a lot of us kind of unpack some of the things that we may struggle with and don't even know we struggle with. So I'm going to read a couple of these lines. In the course, this is physical and medical. In the course of my time in New Mexico, while under the care of both guardians, I was given no proper medical or dental care. The impacts of that time carried to this day. I have scars on my legs with repeated untreated injuries from horseback riding and either falling or being kicked. I was severely constipated due to malnourishment. I would go up to 2 weeks without a bowel movement. I was to take a local 3HO doctor who prescribed that I do crow pose. We talked about that, to pass a bowel movement. To this day, I have digestive issues that impact my ability to pass a bowel movement, and I'm severely stressed by going to the bathroom. I have a cleft palate, and during my time there, I developed an entirely second set of teeth. When I left 3HO and got proper dental care at 13, I'd have 10 teeth pulled from my mouth from both decay and the structure of my mouth. The physical demands placed on us in school and camps were extreme, and it was abusive. When we ran 10 plus miles in the desert, we did calisthenics daily in rotations of 100 each. I was the youngest, and if I couldn't keep up, the group was pushed, and then I was beat up by the older kids, so I did force myself. I had severe lower back pain my entire life. My guardians, the Wagadus, were obsessed with perfect yogic form. I was made to do positions for literally hours, so to attain the perfect form and get great expense to my personal well-being. The extreme expectations on my young body has had medical implications that have carried with me my entire life. My guardians were militant survivalists. I was exposed to an arsenal from the time I got to the Ashram. We were taught the world would end and the mighty Khalsa would live. We would all go up to the solstice site and needed to know how to defend ourselves. I was 8 the first time I shot the AK-47. I was 8 at the first of many times I held a grenade. I was 8 when I learned to sword fight and got my first sword. The trailer I loved and had a full cache of weapons, and I had full access to them when I wanted to touch or use them. It was incredibly unsafe. I had no parameters for what normal children played with. The weapons were what I played with. Damn. And PTSD. Weak people blame. I wasn't a victim. I refused to be. I said over and over, this didn't happen to me. This didn't happen to me. This didn't happen to me. It happened, and I happened to be there. I avoided all real discussion, and I trust no one. No one, 100%. Never have. I avoid with ease anyone getting to actually know me. I'm gifted at it, and you don't even realize it. I withdraw and hide with ease and can be physically present while emotionally absent all at the same time. I've come to realize this is PTSD. My anger simmers, and I no longer lash at whomever is closest. I can self-regulate and withdraw to be with animals as I was taught in Espanola. Horses don't ask me questions. I consistently invite in damaged people and mitigate and parse who knows what sides of me. No one has ever seen all of me, not even me. I have selective to no compassion of ability to empathize. I don't sleep well. I wake up every day before the sun rises and feel guilty if I don't. Whew. I extensively struggle with me in positions of authority and have to continue to work at trusting them. I get defensive and guarded with male bosses. I wanted to speak a couple of those lines. This one, I am gifted at it and you don't even realize it. Mic drop. I think if there is something that is a trait amongst kids born in this dharma, it's this idea of as if we're so compassionate and aware and helpful to others, and yet it's actually like this deep, deep deprivation and loneliness inside. And I've only linked the difference because it's like this external auric projection of like, serving others is the basis of our self. And if you think about these things in terms of the convolution of the teachings, and then what happens when children are born into such neglected environments, you don't even know it. So years ago, I was told that I lived disassociated, but that most people would never be able to tell because I had such a bright personality. And it reminds me of that. It reminds me of like, wow, most people wouldn't know this whole thing that's going on because you're so on point, because you're able to read a room, because you can get to task, because you can execute all of these kind of like high functioning aspects. And yet with this really, really deep, twisted inner knot.
Yeah. I mean, I'm great at faking it till I make it. I am measured. I'm articulate. For all intents and purposes, I show up physically. But if you watch me in a room, I'm just the master of talking about you. I can spend hours talking about you and you don't even realize you didn't ask me a question. And I am getting better. The older I get, I'm getting better and better at it. It has been a stunning realization, and I don't even know how to fix it, and I don't know if I want to.
Yeah, and that's your
but I've been doing it my whole life. I do it with my family. I do it with my friends. I use the word, I'm fantastic at editing. And you think you know me. You don't know shit.
Oh my God, is that not so good? And you think you know me. It's like, once again, it goes back to openness without vulnerability, right?
Yeah. I had something, again, life is a series of moments. About over the summer, my friends have this major party every single July 5th. There's like 50 of us. It's a big deal. And I'm at a table, and one of my friends, who I have been friends with also since we were 15 years old, and he knows me a little bit better than most. And he definitely has more insight into 3HO than most. because he chose to participate in some of it. He chose to go to Yoga West. He's done yoga there. He's met my 3HO friends, so he's been more involved. And we're sitting at a table, and I don't even remember how the conversation became about me, which of course made me start to get hives. And one of my friends looks at me, and she's like, she just randomly was like, Darci, you're so nice. And without even thinking, without even hesitating, he's like, Darci's not nice. And I mean, there was silence, and it felt like forever, but it must have been 2 seconds, to which he's like, what? She's not. And he goes, she'll lay down her life for you, but she's not nice. And he doubled down. And the conversation kept going because, of course, I didn't know what to say or do. But I went home that night, and ever since, and I thought to myself, well, shit, am I not nice? What does that mean? I didn't even know what it meant, but I knew he felt it. And I knew that that was my conditioning. Maybe I'm not nice, but I don't know what that even means now. But I'm the person who, this is a person who legitimately, if he goes into crisis, I've always been one of the first people there. I've been even who his wife calls to make sure I'm the first. He's like a kind of a brother from another mother situation. And, but gosh, I'm not nice. And I'm still sitting with that. And I'm still sitting with it. It didn't hurt me because, and my friend was pissed. My other friend who said it, she was like, Darci's nice. And I was like, maybe I'm not. And I just say this to say, there's just so many parts of ourselves that are not there that we don't realize.
That's right. And if you functioned your whole existence that way, you wouldn't know it's not there. You know,
Right.
I think that's such an important element for us to get, because again, if you joined a cult, you know, you have a sense of yourself prior. But what we have to do is find an essence of ourself that we've never come to actually know, but it's still in there. And it's so twisted.
It is. And to have my mom tell me I have selective compassion, to have him say I'm not nice, those link, right? They have to. But I'm also, again, like you and I've talked about, I'm absolutely the person you need in a crisis. I go full tactical. I will solve for you. I am Olivia Pope on Scandal. I will handle it. Like, I am the person who knows how to execute and get it done and stay calm and stay even. But shit, does it matter if I'm not nice and not compassionate? I don't know.
Well, and there's the abyss in between, right? Like, what aren't you able to feel that fills in the in between, right? So it's, again, it's one extreme or the other. And when we've operated in extremes, we think it's one way or the other, right? And really, there's a whole range in between, folks, that we get to have access to. Although getting access to it isn't very easily if you've lived without accessing that feeling self for so long.
And that's just it. Like, I know the word, I know the definition. Of course, I know the definition, but clearly I wasn't even offended.
Yeah, exactly.
I was, isn't that, I wasn't, I'm still not. I've thought about it and I'm still not offended. Like, okay.
Yep. And again, this is why it's CPTSD, folks, and not just PTSD, because PTSD is generally an incident that happens, right? And so we have a self, and then an incident happens, and then we have a different self, a PTSD self. But a CPTSD self is just we've marinated in traumatic environments for so long that it no longer is traumatic. It's just normal. And when something is your normal, then a plant grows in an adaptated state. And so we've all grown into very adaptated states that are pretty magnificent adaptations, as far as I'm concerned. And it doesn't mean that we haven't left elements of ourselves behind that we've never even had a chance to get to know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's why I appreciate you wanting to really bring this part of your share to this podcast, because sometimes all of the convoluted, magnanimous details of 3HO and all of the crazy pants of why be the predator and the choices he made and all the things overshadows the what we're left with, like what we're left with in every day trying to figure out. And it's hard. It's hard to be a grown 45-year-old woman today, not knowing how to make choices around what I want to eat. It's hard, right? It's hard to be you and interact, not knowing that what's a feeling that you're not able to feel that somebody else's normal feeling. Like these things break us down and make us feel very inadequate and not enough. And it's much easier to kind of tuck that back away and be my high functioning self than it is to let myself crack open and be this 3-year-old that never got enough food.
Yeah. I mean, when you and I signed off the podcast last week, you said to me that I might feel vulnerable for the next 24 hours. And I will tell you, my first reaction in my own head was, why? Because again, feeling vulnerable is weak. I don't allow myself to feel vulnerable.
Right.
There's so much to learn. And I think that so many of us are faced with, do you want to? My mom, right before she died, my mom was sober the last year of her life. And right before she died, about 1 or 2 months before she died, she called me. And she was hospitalized for that last year with full liver failure from her addiction. And she called me and she said, can you tell me what happened? And I said, about what? And I was very cold. And she said, in 3HO, what happened to you? And I said, no. And she said, I really want to know. And I said, no. I said, there is no reason in the universe for me to tell you the pain and the hell I went through. But here's my mom dying, asking me for something. And I still, to this day, don't think I made the wrong decision, because I said to her, it will only cause you pain. I knew she had a limited time left. And the idea of putting that pain on her was just not a choice. It was not a choice to me. But I say that to say, I think a normal non-3HO person would have bared their soul. They would have been crying. I wasn't. And I wasn't, I think that we are all making decisions. I am making decisions. I am actively making choices of consciousness for what I want to deal with. And doing this podcast is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And yet you would look at me and there's not been a tear shed. You would not know that. You'll see me this afternoon. I'll go rescue dogs and do adoptions. You'll have no idea that I had an emotional morning, because even in the midst of sharing all of this trauma, I was Wednesday Addams and little to no emotion came out of me. And I am trying very hard in preparation for grandchildren, admitting this, in preparation for the fact that I genuinely would like to be in love again. My boyfriend passed away 3 years ago, and I very, very much would like to be in love. And I would very much like to be in love for the first time in my life while actually feeling it.
Yes.
And I have a whole life ahead of me still. And I think I want to feel it. And that's terrifying. But it's why I am having these conversations, because I hope that for a lot of us. I really do. It's not too late. It's really not.
It's not. I got tingles when you said that, and I wish that for you. I wish you to feel the love while you're in love. And I too wish for love. I think it's the last 2 years that I've been able to recognize how unsafe relationship is to me. And also like, wow, I don't have friends. And I don't know how to cultivate them. Like of course I do, because I have communication skills and I care and I love. So that's not actually true. But my CPTSD self will say, you don't have friends because you don't cultivate friends. And it goes back to, it's not safe to have people close. My sense of love is love at a distance. Everybody I've ever loved is left. And so how do you love? How do you let in something when you're in habitual mode of keeping things at a distance? Because I've learned like that's not safe. And so I just really appreciate you bringing some of the rawness to what you struggle with today, that these things, these early situations, as much as you can remove the emotion from it, because that was a part of your training, today in everyday real life interactions, you're still actively aware, like, wow, I don't feel this. I don't know this. I can do this. And to me, it really reflects your commitment to healing trauma, because that's the process. The process is just to become aware of, wow, I do this. And then starting to make links, not trying to pretzel yourself. How I really love how in permission you are of like, I might be this way for the rest of my life. I don't even not like it. I like this way of being, that's a part of the process, right? Is to get fully appreciative of the way you are, and then start linking why I'm the way I am, so that something else gets to emerge. A new way of Darci gets to show up.
Yeah. And to allow because I would tell you that, I think I mentioned this on my last call, I have 5 main friends. I have a lot of acquaintances. I have a very much like ashram life. I have a lot of people around me. We all do. And we have a community, and I then created a new community. And I have some great people. And I don't want to, I really don't plan. A lot of them have listened to this, which I'm super grateful for. And I'm going to actually ask them to listen to this one. And I'm going to ask them for another 2 hours of their life.
We try to do it in an hour, folks.
We do.
There's just too much that comes
too much
out.
Trauma.
Sorry.
And I'll buy them all some wine. I have some Zinfandel that I can give. But at the end of the day, I'm terrified that by revealing who I really am, saying things like I'm not compassionate, acknowledging maybe I'm not nice, but at the end of the day, I am the person who will get in a car, and because again, my love language is acts of service, I will be there for you no matter what. And I have been, and I have proven that over and over and over again my entire life for my friends. I hope that at the end of this, other people who will listen to it, who are in the same circumstances as you and I are, where we're just trying to choose a path forward, but acknowledge the impact that happy, healthy, holy had on our lives, from the simplicity of how we dress, though it's not simple, it's complex, and the nuance that we are absolutely all products of being raised in a cult.
Yes. And the slow process of what it means to reclaim a self you never had.
Yeah.
And yet there is this thing, like the more I've learned about cult reprogramming or deprogramming, there is something called the essential self, and you can feel it. You can feel the you that you've never had. And it seems odd, but you can, and there is the essence of Darci, and there's the essence of me. And then there's all these layers of behavior and conditioning and ways of being that we have learned to have to be. And it can be confusing because some of those ways of being are parts of the me that I'm most proud of, right. My most courageous self, that I can travel the world, that I'm not afraid to do this, that I can go do this, that I can adapt to any environment, all these things. And so there is this kind of meeting of the selves in trauma healing, or recovery, as I like to call it, because we're recovering ourselves. We're literally, there's coats and coats, like I like to call it plaster, because plaster mimics the shape of you. So there's plaster over the essence of us. And as we crack, like your willingness to say, wow, you're letting it ring through you. Somebody says I'm not nice, and then somebody else said this, and so, and yet they all ring familiar, right? So
Yeah.
it's like a layer of your plaster cracking to get to the vulnerable you that was always there that got plastered over. And the only way we do that is by having somebody poke that veil, right? So somebody says something to you and you're like, huh, not nice. Just
Yeah.
like somebody said to me something and you're like, huh, I don't feel anything when I eat. And then, and now you might marinate on that question or topic for years
Yeah.
and maybe forever even, right?
Yes.
So remember, there's not a destination we're getting to, and there's not a right way to be. Really, to get into permission with the way that we are is probably the best thing we can do for ourselves, because we grew up with so much abusive language that we're not okay as we are. And so in all your coping mechanisms, in all your adaptations, in all your survivalist ways, you, me, anyone listening, you know, I think the best thing we can do is stop gaslighting ourselves and realize how much gaslighting has been built into the teachings and the healthy, happy, holy culture, disguised as compassion, disguised as love, disguised as community, disguised as consciousness, but it's not. It's called gaslighting. So keep up when your body is saying, stop, listen, rest, something else. And we say, keep up, it's a form of gaslighting. So all of the ways that we've gaslit ourselves and each other in the name of spirituality and consciousness. Yeah. So folks, bring it in, Darci. Where do you want to wrap up here? What do
I would just say, I again thank everybody, and I thank you, GuruNischan, because I hope people take the time to listen to, especially this one. For 3HO people, the anthropology one was very important, because again, we have to prove we did this, right? It's important to those still very in. They have to hear the facts. But this one on the impact, and therapy is not easy to access for everybody. And I want to acknowledge that, as I have a lot of people who work with me who can't just get a therapist. They can't afford it. And therapy is often not as covered by health insurance. And some people have the opportunity for the reparation process with it, and some do not. But at the end of the day, I would encourage you to just reach out to somebody you maybe know within second gen who's accessed one, who maybe could help give you guidance on how to find one that might work for you. Leverage the social media platforms, because it is expensive. It is, and finances are not easy for a lot of people. So I do want to just say that there are a lot of resources if we ask the questions, which can be done in private message if you don't want to put it out in the universe. But how important it is to leverage the network that we do have from our shared experience to hopefully help you find somebody that you can talk to that works within what you can do.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that for a lot of people, the internal 3HO network is not safe. There aren't a strong group of friends. I want to acknowledge that within the OG second gen, there are some strong cliques. And we're talking about bonds that are stronger than family. And that's an important element to understand. And then in some of our generations, like I didn't ever receive bonds like that because of my unique situation. But so some of us are little islands that have never had real close relationships. And yet the nostalgia of community still lives in me. The nostalgia of that level of bonding lives in me. But as I distill it, I realize, yeah, that's not actually closeness. It was a perceived closeness.
It's trauma bond.
Is a trauma bond. Yes, it's interesting. But what I love about what you just said was there are resources that you don't have to publicly post to be able to get access to. And that's really where I hear Darci going with this is
100%.
So what Darci said about getting a cult therapist, like, you know, when somebody has one, it's easier to get a referral to one.
Correct.
You know?
I've been able to refer mine. If you email my therapist, she says she's full. every single person who has reached out to me, I have gotten them in with her. When I say it's 3HO, she's managed to make it work. But that's somebody direct messaging me. Again, not putting it in
Saying,
the
"Help
public
me."
forum,
Yep.
but messaging just me.
And this is important because like I'll talk a lot about somatic therapy, but there's other forms of therapy that are really important. Internal family systems is a really important form of therapy. And if you're not familiar with it, look it up. A lot of insurances are covered with that, you know. Cult therapists that are licensed therapists will also be able to get covered by some insurances. There's EMDR, and you know, just start. And if you notice your resistance to therapy, that's okay. Just also recognize that that's not unique to you. It's very much within a cult environment. YB specifically talk down about therapists, but even within all cults, there is an element to where we're trained to not seek professionals outside the environment. And we all got that. I mean, I thought that was probably one of the coolest things since sliced bread about our culture, was that everybody we needed was inside the culture. If you need an
Ugh.
accountant, if you need a doctor, if you need a chiropractor. And I thought that was a benefit, but now I can see it as a way to keep us from getting actual real information that wasn't 3HO based.
Yeah, and I would also, you know, to the cult therapy again, as GuruNischan and I both talked about, I have personally gotten so much out of it. But I would also like to add and reiterate how much I got out of a specific anger management therapist.
Good one.
And the reason I am saying that is I have this billboard of quotes in my office where I write down things when they hit me. And it has things like respond, don't react. You choose what you participate in, just things that hit me personally. And one of them was I heard on a TV show, it was Grey's Anatomy, not gonna lie. And it was a woman going through anger therapy. It was the character. And the therapist says to the character, I'm paraphrasing because it's in my office, but the character is controlling herself. She's completely measured. And the therapist is like, what do you want to do? Throw this at me, throw something at me. And the woman's like, no, I refuse. And ultimately the therapist goes something to the effect of, you're allowed to be angry at what you've been through. It doesn't make you like them. And for me, I remember crying when I heard it. I lost myself crying, and I cry about once every 2 to 3 years. It resonated, and the direct quote being that I had to, it's okay that I'm angry about my childhood. It is okay that I get angry at my mom and my dad. I can love them and be angry at the same time. I can love my friends in 3HO and be angry that I got the shit kicked out of me at the same time. Learning how to be angry and not see anger as a weakness was huge for me. And seeing an anger therapist was possibly learning to handle my rage, my simmering under the current rage that blew, was so incredibly helpful.
You bring up such an important point here, in that now with kind of the worldly awareness of mental health, there is a lot more kind of talk therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy available, which you might only kind of get some sort of a anger management therapist. So you might find an anger management group, meaning there are more free resources, but you might not find a specialist cult therapist, but you might find an anger management therapist. So this is a really beautiful hybrid way of starting to address things that we all know we have compacted issues with. Your anger might be so steady and so beneath the surface that it hasn't blown up in ways in your life the way Darci has explained her life. Same thing with me. But it doesn't mean my compacted anger and rage hasn't been in there. I didn't have moments where I was arrested or beat people up. But when I was in business and I would be overly stressed, I would be horribly mean and very sharp with my tongue. And so I started noticing like, wow, I have a regulation issue, but this goes back a while ago. And then only like in 2015, I was crying in this public group, women's group thing I was in. And the woman on the stage says to me, "Can everybody hear that?" And I'm literally just crying, telling my story. She's like, "Can everybody hear that?" And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Can everybody hear the anger in her voice?" And I'm crying. Right.
Right.
But she could hear that compacted anger that I didn't have access to. So I'm circling this back around to say, even today, I will feel anger and I can't always recognize it for what it is. Um,
Yes.
and so when we are so used to internalizing anger, which is not a conscious thing, when you grow up in an environment where it's not safe for you to feel an emotion, whether it's
Right.
crying or anger or anything, any upset at all, or any needs at all, the body actually has a default mechanism of repression. And so it's not like I feel anger and choose not to express it. It's, I don't even know it's anger. And
Mhm.
it
Right.
turns in on myself to where it starts eating me up instead of just having the healthy volatile release. Um, so going back to seeing a anger management therapist, great idea, because start where you can and start somewhere, but start dealing with emotions.
It's dealing with emotions, 100%. And same thing. I mean, even though I would have those rage moments, I then overcorrected because I felt like I lost control.
Mm,
So since 2009, in that one moment, I haven't so much as raised my voice,
wow.
which is a big, big problem also, which is why that quote impacted me. I got arrested.
Mm,
I lost my cool. I failed,
mm.
right? I failed. Extreme situation, but I looked at it that I failed.
Yeah, you got unfeathered.
I did. And so
Mm,
therefore, I redisciplined, I rehoned in. I
mm.
got worse. I no longer showed any emotion.
Yeah, and think about root lock for a second, folks. Like, think about what it means to like squeeze and contain, squeeze and contain, squeeze and contain, right? And while that might be a healthy practice once in a while during a yoga, at the end of your yoga practice, it's not a healthy practice to squeeze and contain for the rest of your existence.
Mhm.
And so I've kind of learned that my physiology formed in a perpetual root lock, that I'm literally living in a root lock all the time as a set point normal.
Mhm.
So it reminds me of what you just said about um, rebuttoning up, the
Yeah,
opposite extreme. And so it's like when we
100%.
don't have access to our normal healthy waves of emotions that need to come and go, and they're actually teachers, they're actually tuning us into indicators that we need to pay attention to, we actually lose touch with a really fundamental elemental part of our own existence. And so when we can start to see that the structure of where we come from taught us a fundamental way of being, that's not a healthy, normal human way of being. It's a trauma response. Um, then we can get the help, because therapists are there to help us, right? The anger, the access to our healthy anger.
Mhm. And we're just, I guess for me to sum up, we're not done.
We're not.
We have so much time ahead of us, so much time. And back to you choose what you participate in. And there is nothing but opportunity. um, I legitimately know that I have an entire life still to lead, and I'm pretty fucking excited about it. And it's part of why I hope that the impact part of this call can really, you hear this. If it just helps one or two people, if it also helps people stop joining, that'd be huge. Because the bottom line is, if we don't see it, just as a Yogi Bhajan inherently grew a Guru Jugat, it will continue. So we
That's right.
have to see it.
Yeah, and we have to know that the yoga festivals are continuing, the solstices are going to continue. The only
Yeah.
reason these things stopped was not because of what's been happening in our community, it's because of COVID. So let's be
Mhm.
clear. And the marketing machine is going to go on. And guess
Yes.
what? The marketing machine are these gatherings and is the teacher training, because new students come in and they only get taught what they're fed to look at. And guess what? They get their name changed from the solstice, and all of the whole machine is there. And when you're making so much money at it, and if that's your livelihood that you've anchored for the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, it's going to be a pretty hard, tough sell to try to get some of these folks to unbrand, right? So we
Yep.
have to know it continues. That's just how it goes. So, you thought you left in 92 and all was good. No, that stuff continued growing, and it continued
Yep.
growing, and it created cults within a cult, within a hyper predator cult. And, that's the Guru Jagat. That's the Hari G one, because they keep going,
I
breeding
do.
this stuff, and then new people come in. And so our stories do matter to kind of put a cog in the wheel to say, hey, when somebody chooses, because it comes down to choosing to listen, this story's in the public domain and they can listen.
Yep.
It's excellent. Folks, I want to encourage you to look in the show notes for the links of the books that we talked about, CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. I'm going to recommend another book called The Language of Emotions, What Your Feelings Are Trying to Tell You, by Karla McLaren. I'll put a link down below as well. And it's remember that, certain books are going to resonate with you when you're ready for them, right? So not everything is for you at every moment. If you attempt to look at something and you fall asleep, that's a sign your system's just not ready for it. It's just okay. There'll be another time that your system's alive and well for it. Same thing with listening to podcasts or whatever. But out of any of this, get yourself some support, get yourself some therapy, and get yourself the reimbursement that 3HO is offering until they're not offering it anymore, so take advantage of it while it's here, and recognize the amount of indoctrination out of getting help, and let that be a part of the propeller. Let that be a part of the propeller to get support, because you deserve support. You're not in this alone, and you didn't get here alone. Anything last to wrap up, Darci? You complete?
That is it.
Okay, I'm feeling pretty complete too. Folks, I want to say thank you so much for your listening attention. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcasting platform. It really does make a difference to support us. If you haven't yet come over and to support my new podcast, check it out at GuruNischan.com, and you can click on the link podcast and it'll show you my new platform. It's on Substack. And follow and like and support that work. And as always, if you want to be a guest on this podcast, shoot me an email at gn@GuruNischan.com. Keep in mind that I have no idea who you are when you reach out to me, so give me some context. Have in the mail, in the subject line, the year you joined and what story you want to tell. If I do know you, I'm not talking to you, but some yoga students reach out to me as if I know them. Like, yo, how many people have joined 3HO over the span of 50 years? A lot.
So many.
And how many are cray-cray and I don't want to talk to them? Plenty. So if you want to differentiate between the cray-cray yoga students that have joined us in the last 50 years, then email me with a proper email, and no, you don't get to talk to me for 2 hours on the phone sharing me your story, when really you should be getting yourself a fucking therapist. Okay. I am not your therapist for 3HO. Okay. I'm creating a safe space for us to share some really convoluted shit. And that's it. Okay. But come coherently for something to say. This isn't just the spew session. And I say that with all my compassionate heart. Every one of your story is important to share. And yet I don't know who you are unless you help me context it. Okay. So thank you so much, GN@GuruNischan.com. And this concludes another episode of the Uncomfortable Conversations podcast, the untold stories of the 3HO Kundalini Yoga community. If you'd like to contribute to this broadcast and support me with a one-time or monthly donation, you can do that as well at GuruNischan.com/uncomfortable conversations. Be sure to stay tuned in, and I look forward to talking to you on the next episode. Thank you, Darci, for coming on back.
Bye.